All set.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's wonderful to have you with us this afternoon. This is the Understanding the Role of Play in Pre-K through Grade 2 classrooms, incorporating playful strategies. This is the second of 3 sessions that we are providing on this topic through the engagement series this school year. Some of you may have attended or listened to the recording from our October section, which was focused specifically on the research around playful learning and why it is such a beneficial part of children's learning experiences. This afternoon, we're going to shift the topic just a little bit, and we'll talk about some of our objectives for that in just a minute. But we want to start with a little bit of a welcome and let you know who we are and get to know who's in our audience today. So for those of you who I haven't met before, I'm Leanne Larson. I'm the Director of Early Learning in Maine's Department of Education. The Early Learning team is part of our larger Office of Teaching and Learning. The Early Learning team supports educators across the pre-K through early elementary span, so usually up through about grade 3. Sometimes we work higher than that, up into the upper elementary range with some of our colleagues in the department. But primarily we focus on the earlier side of the elementary span. And I'm going to pass it to Nicole.
Thanks, Leanne. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Nicole Medor. I'm the early childhood specialist, and I work on the early learning team here at the Department of Ed with Leanne and some other colleagues who aren't with us today, but certainly a critical part of our team. So happy to be here and to share this information today.
So I think we're a small enough group that maybe we could just quickly go around and introduce ourselves. So Lauren, would you mind kicking things off? Just saying hello from the St. Croix Valley.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Lauren Remington. I teach at St. Croix Regional Technical Center, and I think they're going to introduce themselves too.
Great.
My name is Lainey Osmore, and I'm in 11th grade. My name is Bella Bishop, and I'm in 11th grade.
I'm Yvonne Cook, and I'm in 12th grade.
Really nice to have you with us today. Lisa?
Hi there. I'm Lisa Sweat. I'm a kindergarten teacher at Central Community Elementary School here in Corinth.
Welcome. How about Jennifer?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Cooley. I'm a former special education teacher here in RSU 21. I went on maternity leave and didn't go back yet, so I'm just maintaining my license for some credits.
Great. Welcome. Caroline?
Hi, I'm Caroline, and I currently work at Kiev Waffis Education at the Leadership School, and also am student teaching in St. George in a first grade classroom.
That's terrific. Thank you. And Nicole, the other Nicole.
Yes. Hi, I'm Nicole Evans. I'm the assistant principal with Lisa, same school, at Central Community Elementary School in Corinth. I'm not there today with her, but here on Zoom.
Well, we're glad that you were able to join us. It's nice to have all of you. All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the second session that we are offering around playful learning in the early elementary grades. And we are moving today out of the why behind play-based learning to the how of play-based learning. And this session today is going to focus on the how. Our third session will also be partly focused on the how and also partly focused on how we can assess through playful learning. So if that is of interest, then you'll want to think about that in March when we'll be offering the third installment. But today we're going to be hoping that you'll walk away from the session with a little bit more background or understanding about how to design some interdisciplinary play-based learning experiences, really being able to identify some of the ways of intentionally fostering student agency through choice, voice, and co-construction, thinking about the environment as what we call a third teacher, getting a chance to look at some lesson plans that might serve as inspirations for you to think about what you could be doing in your own classrooms. And also getting a chance to do a little bit of design work around playful learning centers that are inspired by a shared text that we'll engage in. So we hope that that will fill your bucket a bit this afternoon. But to get things started, we always like to begin with a little bit of an icebreaker and usually try to model one that might be kind of a playful way of engaging the learners in your classroom. We know that most educators do have some kind of a community meeting time during the course of their school day, often first thing in the morning. So this afternoon, we're going to use a technique called Tell Me Some News. And this is a strategy that you can employ pretty easily in your classrooms. Depending upon the size of your classroom, this is something that you might engage all students in. It doesn't really take a ton of time, but if you have a fairly large class size, then you might decide that you're only going to have a few students each day participate. But basically, the way that it works is that you call on a student who has some news they'd like to share. But before they share their news, the student gets to let the group know what kind of a reaction that they would like from the group when they share their news. And then the student shares, and the audience will react using the way that the student asked them to respond. So I'm going to model this, and then I'm going to ask for a few volunteers to share a little news with us. So when I share my news this afternoon, I would like it if all of you would say, "Aw." So my news, and you can take yourselves off of mute for this, and you might actually want to do that now because it's you're all going to get to have a reaction. So my news is that this coming weekend, I am going to get to take care of my 20-month-old grandson and have him for most of the day.
Aww.
All right. Pretty simple?
Yes.
Okay. So who else has some news they would like to share? And remember, you'll start by telling us how you would like us to react.
I'll go. If everyone would please show excitement so we can go clapping and hooray. I am excited because we are going to be welcoming Within the Whale for a parent involvement community activity.
Woo!
Hooray!
Right.
Who else has some news to share?
I can go. So I'm not at work today because I have a sick baby at home. So if everyone could respond with poor baby.
Poor baby.
Poor baby.
All right.
All right, my news. I just
Lisa,
got out of a long.
Before you tell us how you want us to respond.
Please, yes, please react with go do it, go do it, go do it. Okay. I've been in a long kindergarten meeting, and before that, it was craziness. So I really need to go use the restroom.
Go.
Go do it. Go do it. Go do it.
If she's listening, that's good.
That's awesome. Jen or Caroline, do you have any news you'd like to offer?
I guess I can go. I'd like everybody to say good job as the reaction. So my husband got a promotion at work, so we're really happy about that.
Good job.
Good job. I guess I'd like everyone to react with like yay or exciting because I got to teach my first actual lesson yesterday in writing.
Yay!
Yay!
Exciting.
Nothing like that. All right, not to leave you out, Nicole.
Sure. I have great news. Yes. So I would like everybody to respond by saying, Happy birthday! Today is Leanne's birthday.
Happy
Happy
birthday!
birthday!
Oh, you. All right. Well, thank you so much for engaging with us in that activity. Before we talk a little bit about what some of the underlying goals of that experience are, how did that strike you? What jumped out at you about engaging in that type of a experience with your students, or what it could offer for your students?
A lot of like regulatedness within the classroom, so opportunities for that. I think that there's also, when thinking about regulation within the classroom, widening the window of tolerance as well, because I know for myself, when going through that experience, there was at points I was a little uncomfortable, but in a good way, because being uncomfortable made me very alert, and so I was more attentive. And so through this experience, or thinking from the regulated side, it was an awesome opportunity.
Thank you, Lauren, for that. It's a great example.
I think it's a good way to validate kids' emotions because I feel like sometimes someone will share something and everyone won't really know how to react. And so it's just a good way for the child that's sharing to feel validated and the other kids to practice sharing different emotions.
Yeah. And I will just to extend that a little bit, Caroline, I think it's also a nice way of getting to know how kids are feeling in your classroom. You may not realize until they share or give you how they would like people to respond to them to realize that, which is helpful. Great.
I like the activity because it allowed students to share what's going on at home or in their personal lives. And by fostering that impromptu reaction, it makes them, like Carolyn said, feel validated for how they feel about their home and life.
Yeah, exactly, Jennifer. That's great. Did you notice that it didn't really take a lot of time? You know, sometimes our young learners, they love to tell us stories and they go along and along and along. But with this activity and modeling it for them, I think they become accustomed to being able to say what their news is pretty quickly, right? It's not a lengthy period, and they realize that you want to give multiple turns. So they are learning a little bit about how to synthesize down an idea that they want to share. And then it sets them up later in the day to have more conversations with their peers in their classrooms about the news that they shared, because it gives them the chance to make that connection, but at another point in the school day. So you came up with a lot of really wonderful rationale for the use of this type of a strategy in a community meeting. But we'll just share a few other things to be considerate about. This offers just the whole notion of a community meeting in your classroom really is a great way of being able to engage joyfully together. It builds that classroom culture that's so important to learning. And participants get to know and each other, forge those connections. So an activity like the news often will help kids to see something that a classmate's interested in, and knowing each other's interests is a good way of building stronger connection. As you all eloquently pointed out, this is a terrific way of helping children be able to share their ideas and feelings, and encourages others to really listen to that. Asking or telling people how you want them to respond is really intriguing to kids, right? They are wondering, why do they want me to respond that way? Why do they want me to be excited? Or why do they want me to feel sad or empathize with them? So it's really getting them to pay more attention to what a classmate's sharing. And so that really, I think, lends itself to what Lauren was saying, which is that this kind of a strategy helps children practice more mindfulness and a lot of those aspects of executive function that we know young learners are working to build. So it helps them to consider problem solving, conflict resolution, all of those kinds of things can get worked on along the way. whether it's through just the concept of a community meeting or a specific strategy like sharing your news. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and she's going to do just a quick review of content from session 1 in case you weren't with us, so that we kind of have that as a jumping off place.
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Leanne. So like Leanne said, when we met previously in October for our first session of this engagement PD opportunity, we chatted with folks more so around the why of play-based learning. So we talk a lot about the importance of play in early childhood, and quite frankly, it's not a hard sell. We think and we find that educators that work with young children want to see their students playing, right? They want to be able to offer that for their students and for their families. But sometimes it can be difficult to express why, to express the importance of doing so. So we spent a lot of time back in October chatting about that, chatting about why play is the vehicle for learning, right? It's not necessarily an add-on. It shouldn't be an afterthought. We should really be thinking of it when we start to plan lessons and plan activities for our students. So during that time, some sort of key takeaways that we had for the group around why we should consider playful learning for young children is this idea that while children are playing, they tend to be very engaged in whatever the activity is, especially if they had the freedom to sort of choose that activity. We find that students tend to be more relaxed and challenged, right? So those two things come hand in hand. It's not relaxed or challenged. It's not engaged or challenged, right? These things are and statements. We find that during play, students are able to seek and gain new information, right? They seek information from materials. They seek information from the adults in their space, and of course, from the other children that are in their space. During play, it's one of my favorite things to observe is to watch young children experiment and test their understandings and sort of these hypotheses, right? What's going to happen if I climb to the top of that stump? What's going to happen if I'm barefoot on this grass or wearing boots in this puddle, right? They sort of test these wonderings and they see consequences come from those, good or bad, right? It's how they learn. So we chatted a lot back then too about how play offers really powerful ways for students to develop their cognitive skills, their social skills, their emotional skills, their physical development, right? It's really this whole child approach to learning, and also that students play in order to actively learn, right? The two go hand in hand. Some other pieces that we sort of broke down around the why of play was that this playful learning really affords children with so many rich experiences, so many rich opportunities to continue their growth and development. So through play, we know that children are problem solving, right? If they're with their peers and they're sharing a space or they're sharing materials, right? They're bound to come up with or to experience opportunities where they need to work with each other, work through things in order to problem solve, whether that's a social problem solving skill or trying to build something they want to balance, but it keeps crashing down, right? Solving that problem of why that keeps happening. Typically play happens in some sort of a small group, right? Or perhaps in a parallel way, but typically there's others in a shared space. So that really affords these opportunities for extended conversations, whether it's conversations with an individual child or just amongst the group, right? This opportunity to really model language and model how to be playful. We know that it affords children opportunities to regulate their emotions and their behavior, right? They can practice their reactions. They can observe how their peers are reacting. Adults can really facilitate conversations around why some things are happening or why somebody's feeling a certain way. lots of opportunities for cooperation and communication, right? Opportunities to negotiate, opportunities to take on different perspectives. The photo is really showing children working in blocks, but of course, and you'll see as we continue through today, but that's not just where we're going to see playful learning. So this idea of perspective taking can really happen in dramatic play, can really happen in a library space, it can happen outdoors on a playground. We'll talk a lot too about student agency and children having the space to make decisions for themselves in a way that's appropriate and safe, of course. We'll chat in and we'll continue more today about experimentation, risk taking, right? And how to utilize playful learning to really build children's content knowledge and additional skill building. So what we hope and sort of a message that we like to send is that play is a strategy for learning, right? It's not a set of activities that teachers need to make time for. And that's a quote by a woman named Susan McKay. So the other really important piece that selfishly I like to sort of chat about and share, and we've talked about this and variety of different professional developing opportunities that our team has hosted. But we really like folks to be considerate of the definition of play within the context of which you're describing it, right? So if an educator were to say to a family member, right, in my classroom, I implement a play-based learning curriculum. What that teacher means and what that family is interpreting may not be the same thing, right? So more often than not, when we talk about a play-based activity, it's not uncommon for folks' minds to go to this definition of free play, right? This definition of free play is that it's uninhibited, unfettered playtime. It can happen alone or with peers. It's exploring, discovering, and imagining at will. A really important piece of early childhood. However, when we talk about a play-based instructional program or a play-based learning environment, that's not necessarily what we might be saying, right? Free play really happens like at recess, for example, or during an opportunity where you might have extra time and you're allowing children to free play. This other definition that we like folks to consider and to define, if it's what they mean, is this idea of guided play, which is free play, but also with gentle, sort of unobtrusive guidance from an adult or another child that steers the play, but not the outcome. So typically when educators say, I implement a play-based curriculum, this is more in line with the definition, right? So we just want to be sure that we're defining what we mean by play when we're talking about any of these. A third definition that's another common play-based strategy is this teacher-directed or perhaps adult-directed play. This is more of a prescribed activity. It has a set outcome. It's typically directed by an adult or another, adult figure. Think of like a game, right? This is typically game rules, right? So Candyland, bingo, memory. All of these have really important spaces in a young child's experience, right? However, we just want to make sure that when we're describing the play, we're sort of defining it in the way that we mean, so that it's interpreted correctly. So today we're going to chat and dig deeper into the definition of guided play and what that can look like in an early childhood classroom, specifically pre-K to grade 2. The other sort of piece around why of playful learning, we went a little bit more in depth back in October around research. There, as you can imagine, if you don't already know, there's ample research available to highlight the benefits of play and access to play. All three of those definitions, right? So an individual wouldn't be hard pressed to find this research. The three that we discussed last time were sort of interesting, though. They stand out in the world of playful research. So these three gentlemen that you see on the screen, the first one on the left, that's Dr. Stuart Brown. And his research on play really sort of fell in his lap. It wasn't the intentional outcome. essentially back in the 60s, the 1960s, Dr. Stuart Brown was a student, a research student, and a terrible mass murder occurred in Texas. And he was approached to be part of a team to research the individual who was responsible for this mass murder at the time, and really study why this individual, who by all intents and purposes was an active contributor to society. There were no really red flags. He had never had any sort of trouble with the law or educationally or anything like that. So they were really perplexed about why this tragedy occurred. And Dr. Stuart Brown, through his research, ultimately decided that this individual had a real lack of play in their experience as a child. So he went on to further research how a lack of play can really contribute negatively to a young adult and adult's life. So that's a really quick summary of the research, but he also, interestingly, studies playful mannerisms in the wild in animals. He has this really interesting work around a polar bear and a dog, like in Alaska, like a sled dog. So pretty fascinating research that he has done. We also talked about the gentleman in the middle. His name is Dr. George Land, also research back from the 60s, which sounds like a very long time ago, but it's still very pertinent. And similarly, Dr. Land was not set out to research play. However, he sort of inadvertently found this really interesting connection between young children, specifically 3 to 5-year-olds, and their level of creative thinking. So he worked for NASA, Dr. Land worked for NASA, and they were really struggling with their employees at the time, having a lack of creative thinking. So he developed this like test basically that you could administer, and it would tell you ultimately the individual's level of creative thinking, right? And so the idea being that NASA wanted to recruit and hire people who scored highly on this particular assessment. But throughout his study, he tested 1,600 children and found that those that were aged 3 to 5 years old on this assessment scored, 98% of them scored at the genius level. And then over time, that same group of children, when they reached like the age of 10, by the time they were 10, their scores plummeted. At that time, only 30% scored at the genius level. And then by the time those exact same group of children were 15 and they were assessed again, their figure dropped more down to 12%. And then in a stark contrast, the assessment when they were adults, only 2% retained that high level of creativity. So some fascinating research on creative thinking and playful learning. And then the last individual is Dr. Peter Gray. He really speaks to the importance of uninhibited play. So more of that free play definition that I showed you on the last slide. He is a research professor at Boston College. And he speaks about the importance of play in a child's overall happiness, their overall self-reliance, and how it helps them become better students. So like I said, lots of research available. These three selfishly really speak to me, and just I find them incredibly interesting, how they sort of found themselves in this space of early childhood and play, and how prominent their research still is, 50 years after the fact. So that was just some information there from last time. I'm going to switch it back to Leanne. She's going to talk to us about some more guided play and student agency.
Thanks, Nicole.
Sure.
So when Nicole was sharing a few minutes ago, that continuum of play from free play to guided play to teacher-directed play, we know that in our classrooms, guided play and teacher-directed play will probably be found more frequently than free play will be in the classroom setting, although there is still space for free play to happen, whether it's in the classroom or outside and on the playground or in nature. But for the purposes of our session today and moving into our last session in March, we're going to focus more on this concept of guided play And then next time we'll talk a bit more about teacher-directed play as well as guided play and how to kind of shift between that part of the continuum. So when we think about guided play, I like this visual in front of you because I think it calls out some of the qualities of guided play that are so important for us to keep in mind. Guided play offers children a chance to be both active in their learning and interactive, whether it's interacting with their peers in the classroom, with the materials available to them, or with the teacher. So it becomes a very social part of the day. And we know that learning is very much a social context, or construct. Additionally, when we think about guided play, there is a level of intention behind the play that's occurring in the classroom. We sometimes refer to that as being teacher initiated. So while the teacher might not be controlling through this type of play exactly what the outcomes will be, there is some level of intention in what the classroom experience is going to be set up like and how children might be interacting. But within that, there's a lot of opportunity for children to direct their learning. And the part that I think is probably most significant is the bottom quality, which is joyfulness. Above all else, we want children to experience learning in a joyful way. When they are feeling joy in their learning, they are typically much more engaged in their learning. And we know that engagement is hugely important to their ability to construct understanding, to stay focused and working through and persevering in learning that can sometimes be challenging for them. But when they're feeling a level of joy, they will stick with it and they'll want to be there. They'll want to come to school. Often advancing more playful learning in classrooms makes a big difference for attendance in schools, because kids really want to be there. So we're going to break this down just a little bit more over the next couple of slides. The first of which is about students' agency, that kind of child-directedness. So I'll let Nicole advance the slide a little bit. So when we're talking about students having agency over their learning, you may have heard this referred to as making sure that children have voice and choice and ownership for their learning. In other words, they're getting to more actively decide, do, and reflect about their learning. This is very empowering for young children when they get to make decisions about their learning, when they get to be the ones who decide what they have some preferences around, where they get to ask some questions or express their ideas. So that voice is really significant. Next, having choice means that kids will get a chance to determine what materials they might be engaging with, how they'll use those materials. So what kind of activities, maybe what, if they're engaging in dramatic play, let's say, what role they'll take in that. What will their character be, or what object will they pretend to be? So having that choice, and I think many of us, even as adults, know that when we have choice over something, it usually makes us a lot more interested in doing something than if we're being just consistently told this is what you have to do. And that all leads into that sense of ownership. And when children have more ownership for their learning, it often builds their confidence. They see themselves as a learner who can engage in tough work sometimes, but know that they're going to succeed. So it builds confidence. Decision-making, as I mentioned, is hugely important, and guided play offers that, because rather than telling children exactly what they'll do, teachers are giving them the chance to decide how they will approach a task, or what center or studio they might want to work in that day, how long they want to work in that particular area, what they want to do in that area. And offering children the chance to make decisions goes a long way to bolstering their executive functioning abilities throughout their career as learners and ultimately when they become adults. If we never give children the chance to make decisions, when they finally do have the chance to make decisions, they may not be well equipped to weigh the pros and cons of the decisions they're making. And then finally, we always want to offer children a chance to really reflect about their learning. Reflecting about what they did that particular day, what they worked on, why they engaged in that, what made that engaging for them, what they learned from the experience. So that's in a way also turning some ownership over to students to be able to articulate what it was that was empowering for them as a learner. So guided play, as we look at examples of this afternoon, really be thinking about student agency and where you see opportunity for student agency. The other part of setting up really rich guided play is what's the role of the teacher? So I like to think about this in terms of a teacher sort of shifting from being more of a director in a classroom to becoming more of a designer and a facilitator of learning. There are times for teachers to be all of those things. We are not saying that all day long children should always be the ones making all the decisions, but if we never give them a chance to do that, that's not a nice balance either. There will definitely be times where teachers need to be more of a director and really intentionally teaching something to their students. But there's also plenty of room for them to be a designer of the space and a facilitator of children's learning. And so that really gets at how a teacher can set up the classroom, organize where materials are located, what materials are available, how those materials might connect to some larger conceptual learning or skill development that you're looking to promote in your students. Giving yourselves permission as an educator to watch what your children are doing, observe, to interact with them, often by using open-ended questions that allow you to ask and prompt and learn more about the thinking that's going on for a young child. And offering the chance for kids to make those decisions without you needing to take control of a situation. So this could look like children building a structure, and then the teacher might ask some questions about how the child managed to get the blocks to balance in a certain way, or maybe the child is struggling to get the blocks to balance, and the teacher prompts with some questions to help them think more deeply about what they might adjust in their structure. It could look like children who are working in dramatic play. They've figured out who's going to be what character, but they can't quite figure out how they're going to interact and collaborate. And so the teacher offers them some suggestions or questions that will help to springboard that experience for them. So the role of the teacher is still hugely important, but looks different than what it might in a more directive kind of a situation. And then finally, something that guided play can do really, really well in classrooms is to allow for a more interdisciplinary approach. Because when we're offering children materials and a chance to make decisions about what kinds of experiences they want to have, not only does it allow them to move across different disciplines in their learning, but it also encourages them to connect the dots between those disciplines. So sometimes they might be working on something that's really much more science related, but in the course of doing that, maybe they're doing some writing about what they've created in their experiment or how it's come out. And so it's connecting different disciplines or integrating them in a more natural way. We have a tendency sometimes in school to approach things through just a certain subject area, but then children don't always get to see how does all of that actually connect, and guided play offers that kind of an opportunity. A lot of times guided play will also draw on more natural materials, experiences, a chance for kids to problem solve more readily. Guided play really leverages communication skills, especially oral language development, and things like storytelling, collaboration. It's also a terrific way for children to be able to engage and build different domains of development. Kids are using their motor skills, they are working on social and emotional development, all at the same time that they are building their cognitive capacity. So they're learning how to regulate themselves. They are being able to be engaged in exploring. And all of this is happening across different content areas all at the same time.
Okay, thanks, Anne. So at the beginning of our time together today, we mentioned in our objectives for the lesson or for our time together that we wanted to talk about a little bit around creating a classroom environment and sort of utilizing that as the third teacher in the room. When we say the third teacher, that's really coming from a space of pre-K. Typically in pre-K, there's two adults. So you'd have two adults, and then the environment could be your third. Certainly in the K2 world, having an assistant teacher is a luxury and certainly not common. So in that space, you might utilize the environment as your second teacher, right? Or as that sort of right-hand assistance in the space. So like Leanne said too, I just wanted to reiterate, when we talk about offering opportunities for guided play during the school day, it's certainly not meant to be the entire school day, right? We recognize that there are really other important parts of curriculum and assessment that educators need to get to. And so it's really more about pulling those other lessons, pulling those other conversations together at a point in the day where children can show their agency, make choices, reflect, interact, etc. And so having an environment that supports a portion of the day for that learning and for that play is really important. So this photo here is of a classroom in Maine, and we have lots of examples, but what I like about this photo is it really sort of shows how this particular learning center is organized. You can see that it has a clear purpose while also allowing flexibility for child choice. So the children in this particular picture, some are working on the floor, some are sitting at a table. It looks like it might be a cleared space where children can have a delineated space on the mat, right? So that's where those students are keeping their materials in one space and sort of delineating that that's what they're using at that time. But behind them on the shelves, you'll see that materials are really organized in a way that it's within reach during this particular time of day. It's available for use, right? They're not covered up. There's no stop signs or any sort of visual aids that are telling students that they can't access that. And we'll have other photo examples as well. But when thinking about your environment, you want to think about the organization of that, right? How is the space physically organized, meaning the materials that are held within that space, but also how is the room organized, right? Do you have a dramatic play center that happens to be right next to your library center, right? And is that really conducive, right? Library centers tend to be a more quiet space. Dramatic play tends to be a more loud space. You know, do we want those two things together? Do you have your art center on the carpet when you might want it near the sink and on tile, right? So thinking of how you organize the space is really important. Another thing to consider when you're looking at your environment is the opportunity to provide these open-ended materials, right, that invite exploration, creativity, and problem solving. So on a slide coming up, we'll talk about what we refer to as loose parts, right? This idea of offering students materials that allow them to be flexible with how they're going to use it, right? In that other picture of the students in dramatic play, you saw that they had a variety of different pieces of cloth, and the way that that cloth was being used varied student by student, right? So being just sort of mindful of what's available and what's provided as open-ended. Again, like I said, how you arrange the classroom to promote collaboration, movement, and engagement, right? How does the block area delineate itself from a math center or delineate itself from an art center, things like that. So being sort of mindful of what you have the capacity to offer in the environment and then how it's offered. But also remembering, like I said, those things aren't going to be available all day, every day. So how are you going to create an environment in your space where children recognize that there's a time and place to use the easel, there's a time and place to use the blocks, etc., right? And really being mindful about how that's organized and how it's arranged and introduced to the kids. We really encourage the use of visual supports, labels, charts, photos, especially in the beginning of the school year when you're really setting up the routine and expectations of your classroom environment, right? Using those visual supports to guide the play and reinforce learning goals. It's really going to help, especially during, for example, cleanup time, right? Students are going to know where to put the markers away, where to put the blocks away, where to put the garbage, etc. So those visual supports really are meant to assist the children in understanding their classroom better and assist you as the educator to not have to constantly tell children where things go or how to take care of an item. Like we were mentioning around this interdisciplinary approach, right? We want the environment to embed those literacy, numeracy, science materials, right? Naturally within play areas, right? Nobody says that books can't be in the block space, right? Certainly we want to encourage that cross-content interdisciplinary space. In the art center, we want children to be thinking about, exploring with colors, exploring with textures, thinking about adding words or letters or writing onto their creations, right? So really promoting this idea that this isn't where we do numbers, this isn't where we do letters, this isn't where we do science, but rather we do all of those things in all of these areas. I mean, this really is a no-brainer, right? When it comes to your classroom environment, but of course we want to establish consistent routines, consistent expectations that support purposeful play, but also that student independence and promotes that, sort of sense of this is my space, these are our materials, and we want to take care of it in a way so that it lasts longer. And we sort of, the children, sort of get this really responsibility about taking care of each other and taking care of the environment. And then really the importance of observing and intentionally scaffolding play through questions, modeling, and prompts. We chatted about that a moment ago with the role of the adult, but also setting up your classroom so that the adult can be essentially anywhere, but still able to see and hear and observe children in a different space, right? That's a huge proponent of safety in a classroom, right? We don't want pieces of furniture that are really tall or block the visual or the audio ability to observe students in another space. And then of course the environment should create always a safe, welcoming space that values students' curiosity, that encourages them to take risks and to explore. So I've mentioned this idea of centers, right? Or maybe some folks might refer to them as studios. We'll refer to them both ways, but really we sort of use the terms interchangeably, at least we will for the rest of the session today. So common centers, common studios that you might see in an early childhood classroom are dramatic play, an art and an easel, like an art space with an easel space, an area to build blocks. And when I say blocks, I mean like nice, solid wooden blocks, right? Not the cardboard brick ones from the doctor's office in 1986, right? We want the ones that are really durable and really balance and build well. There's typically a space for library or listening, right? A space where children can go that's comfortable, quieter, and offers access to books and poems and what have you. Typically, there's a space that might have more math and manipulative, so think puzzles, dice, small handheld fine motor tools, a space for writing. But again, some of these materials will sort of intertwine throughout all of the centers. And then I mentioned loose parts. So loose parts, or sometimes we refer to them as beautiful stuff, right? This is just a collection of items that might be natural, right? They might be things from nature, acorns, pieces of bark, small twigs and sticks and leaves. They might be recyclables, like, like water bottle covers or corks, or things from the home that otherwise would be thrown away but could serve another purpose in an environment in an early childhood classroom. So a really great example of this is these two visuals, right? So on the left-hand side, you see a small piece of wood with some live edge bark on the edge. And on the other side is what we would probably refer to in a dramatic play kitchen, a piece of food, right? Probably a cookie. So that piece of bark, that piece of wood can be anything. It's a loose part in a classroom. It might be a cookie, right? Students might use it as a tomato slice on a sandwich. Students might use it as a cucumber slice, as a burger bun. It could be a pancake. It could be a cracker. It could be a piece of cheese, a coaster, a plate, right? And so much more. It really lends itself to that creative thinking on behalf of the student. The other item, that little plastic cookie, could be a cookie. I'll argue it could also be a chocolate chip pancake. But typically you wouldn't find this item in the dramatic play being used for anything else but a cookie or maybe a pancake, right? So it really doesn't lend itself as nicely to that creative thinking piece. Also, the wooden bark sample could be in dramatic play, could be at the art table, could be in the block area. It might be in math and manipulatives, right? But the cookie or the plastic food item likely is just going to be in dramatic play, right? We probably won't see that cross into other areas as often as we would hope, or we might see with the bark. So this is just sort of a quick visual to further explain what we mean when we talk about materials in the environment lending themselves to be much more than what they are at face value, perhaps. Okay, so now we have a video, and history has told us that the videos sharing it like this don't always come through as clearly as we hope them to. So what Leanne and I thought might work best is to give you all an opportunity. You can mute yourselves, turn off your cameras. We'll pop the link for this video into the chat box. And then, oh, perfect. Thank you, Leanne. It's in the chat box now. And take the next 8 to 10 minutes or so to watch the video. It's only about 5 minutes long, so it won't take the entire time. But watch the video and reflect on the environment, right? It's going to further discuss what play looks like in a classroom and really look at how the environment is set up. So we would invite you to sort of think critically about your current environments that you work in. Think about that space that you're used to. Think about what this video is sharing. Let's see, it's 1:28. Let's plan to come back together. What do you think, Leanne? Is 1:38 a weird number?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Let's say 1:38, and then that way you can watch the video, do a little bit of thinking, because when we come back, we would like people to share some things that they observed. What did you notice? Did you see examples of student agency? What did you see the teacher doing? But it will also give you a quick stretch break if you need one. So we'll turn cameras off, go watch the video, and then come back and turn your cameras back on by 1:38 so that we can keep going.
Okay, it's just about 1:38. I'm going to invite folks to come back. hopefully you were able to access that video okay and take a little stretch break and do what you need to make yourself comfortable for the next few slides. Okay, and I would love to invite folks to unmute or use the chat box and just sort of jot down what some of your thoughts were. What were some of your reflections from watching that video and reflecting on your current environments with young children? What were some of the things that you noticed or had reflections and feedback on?
I wrote down 3 things that I really noticed and liked about the video. The first one is the various types of play. I feel like it was all structured within an outdoor unit, and they were able to enter into different environments and use different materials. The second thing that I really liked was the open classroom with just like the flat lab tables instead of individualized desks, to engage more or encourage more collaboration. And the teacher was very open to allowing the students and materials to move around the classroom, not just keeping it very structured to like one table at a time, but encouraging that exploration again. And I also liked how during the outdoor exploration time, they noted that there were predetermined rules and guidelines to going outside that were already established, and I would assume established by students and teachers to help them facilitate and guide the outdoor learning experience.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer.
So with my students this year, we actually did the create a den activity that they were talking about in the video, and I just thought it was cool, just how much they could do with such little materials, and that kind of looked the same in this. Like they're given very simple, basic materials, and it just always is cool to see how their creativity comes with such little like materials.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great reflection, Caroline. I agree. That's sort of like what we're saying in the last slide with this idea of loose parts, right? I think to many folks that those loose parts are potentially garbage, right? Or just things that we don't see beyond a stick or beyond a cork or beyond a cap or things like that. But offering them as materials for children to interact with, it can really blossom their creativity, right? Back to sort of Dr. Land's research on creative thinking, right? And the variance of that from young children to adulthood and how that really tapers off over time. Interesting.
I also love with loose parts that they're very inexpensive, right? A lot of it's totally free or just reusing materials in a different way. So there's not a lot of cost to employing them. And it's also a wonderful way for families to get engaged with your classroom by saving, collecting, and sharing some of those for children to bring in and contribute within your classroom, because you will go through a lot of resources over time as they're constructing with the materials.
Yeah. So on the document that Leanne shared via email leading up to today's time together, it's a Word document. There are some other video links on there as well that sort of build off of this idea of guided play in the classroom. So this particular one was on the environments in a playful space. The other videos build on like the role of the teacher and more of that guided play in a centers or studio. So we really encourage you to take the time to watch or peruse some of those videos. We won't have time today to go through all of them, but we wanted to make sure everyone had access to them so that you could share and do a similar reflection as well. So hopefully everybody is able to access that. Okay, I'm going to move us along for the sake of time. Thank you for those reflections, Caroline and Jennifer. I appreciate your thoughts on that. So we're going to move into, if my mouse will work, there we go. We're going to move into talking more about this idea of centers or studios and sort of this time, making this time available to your students. So when we think about students in pre-K or even kindergarten, we would encourage you to offer this time for like 45, maybe 60 minutes a day. So more often than not, we find that teachers, of course, struggle to find the time, and often will incorporate centers or studios like first thing in the morning or at the very end of the day while students are getting dismissed. And while we recognize and appreciate that that is often a time that feels more apt to be playful, right? More apt to be sort of less structured per se. It doesn't necessarily incorporate maybe all students, because if it's a time of day where they're coming into the class or the time of the day where folks are transitioning out, then the sheer number of students that they have and peers to interact with could fluctuate, right? So what we encourage is to think of a time during your daily schedule in pre-K and kindergarten that this could be offered at a more regular, sort of midday or maybe mid-afternoon opportunity, so that learning can be happening. Of course, your other educational expectations are happening, but also this is afforded for all students. In the first and second grade space, we would typically see this for maybe 30 or 40 minutes, and not necessarily every day. It might happen ideally 3 times a week, right? So depending on your daily schedule again and the other things that you've got going on, it's hopefully can be a little more realistic to fit in when we're not trying to do it every day in those upper grades. So the goals of centers and studios: we want this to be a time for students to experience and develop agency and autonomy. We want them to grapple with and expand conceptual knowledge. So the materials and the centers that are offered to them are really going to be connected to learning that's already happening, right? We don't want this to be a time of day that's an isolated conversation or isolated learning, right? If you're studying something in your science unit during another part of the day, how can we incorporate that learning and incorporate that content into centers and studios, and give it an opportunity for students, like I said, it says here, to sort of grapple with the materials and grapple with that thinking. We want centers and studios to be an opportunity for students to use, like we've said, a variety of media and processes to express their understanding. So one of the video or photos on a slide back showed, I think it was first grade students utilizing these like digital microscopes. And I don't know if you noticed on their tray, there was like all this gooey stuff. Those were worms. So talking about a variety of media, right? So here we are, we have 6 and 7-year-olds interacting with a piece of technology that helps them better understand and explore worms. So there's really no barrier on what we say media, what we're talking about. We also want centers and studios to offer students an opportunity to use their discrete skills in authentic ways and engage them in collaborative projects. So there's a variety of ways that could look. And depending on the curricula that you're implementing in your classroom, this would vary. But like I said, it's that connection piece, right? Like this opportunity for centers and studios and guided play isn't meant to be an isolated learning, right? It's meant to build on what the children already know, what they're already studying, what they're already thinking about, and to build on that in collaborative ways. So these are some quick photos. When I mentioned what some centers and studios, what they commonly are, certainly we're not tying into, it has to be this and nothing else, right? Definitely there's room for flexibility here, but we typically would see perhaps an art studio. So in this space, students would have opportunity to work with materials to help them build and create and draw. In this particular video, you can see the student sort of mapped out or drew and planned what they wanted to build, and then were provided with loose parts to construct that in a 3D way. Down below in the bottom video is the drama center or dramatization. I shouldn't say most, often this space is set up as a kitchen, like this video. Certainly that does not always have to be the case. I've seen really phenomenal farmers markets. I've seen veterinarian offices, post offices, ice cream stands, lemonade stands, right? That creativity and the possibility of what the dramatization space can be is really limitless. So don't tie yourselves into that. It always has to be a kitchen. Kitchens are lovely. It offers really great role playing, but so does laundromat, right? So does a McDonald's, so does a grocery store. So be flexible in your thinking of what that could look like. We often will see a science and engineering space, maybe a discovery table that might have water, sand, right? Different materials for students to interact and explore with, a library and listening space, a writing and drawing space, and then, like I mentioned, blocks. Blocks in that video, he's also using what we refer to as hollow blocks, which are bigger than unit blocks. They're heftier, but they're not solid. They're hollow in the middle, and so they're really great for stacking and for building and sort of creating these spaces that are larger than just the unit block. So a really great material to have.
Nicole,
Yeah.
Lauren asked a question, and I'm not sure the answer in the picture. If you go back one slide for just a sec.
Okay. Sure. Hold on just a second. Here we go.
I think you were referring, Lauren, to the dramatization picture.
Yeah, just when I was like pinching and zooming in, it was hard to see if it was like little clips or popsicle sticks, but it looks like it's something that they made.
She's asking me, maybe this is supposed to be like a hanging light fixture?
The chandelier.
The chandelier.
Who's
Yeah,
cute?
yeah, it's adorable, right? Yes, I think it is a chandelier. Yeah, good for you for noticing that.
Yeah. And those are the kinds
was,
of things kids will do, right?
Yeah.
If you give them some open-ended opportunity, they can design amazing things.
Yeah. Yeah, that picture was taken from a kindergarten classroom in Boston when we were there on a visit. Okay, so we're just going to go sort of quickly through these next slides. It highlights the centers and studios that I was just talking about, but it also draws attention to how students are playing, but also learning. So for example, in the art studio, and this might be something that a teacher will hang in that actual space, right? Because if you have a substitute teacher, if your administrator comes in, if you have a volunteer come into your classroom, right? Having these sort of visuals with explanations helps the other adults in the space more fully understand what's happening in that space. So with the art studio, right, I am playing with ideas. As I am experimenting with materials, I am developing a new vocabulary about design and art. I'm fostering my creativity and imagination, collaborating with others, and solving problems. I'm offering and receiving feedback and revising my work. I'm expressing what I know and wonder about my world. This is how I learn. So if you think back to about 12:35, 12:40 this afternoon, when we were talking about the definition of play, and how when we talk about the play that we offer students, that there are different definitions of that, right? So having this sort of reminder and this language to help better define and express what you mean by children playing and how that relates directly to how they learn can be really beneficial. I'm not going to read all of them, but I'm going to read the next couple anyway, just to show you the differences. This is a block center, building center. I am playing. I'm exploring space, physics, and materials. I'm applying mathematical understandings. I'm contemplating the built world. This helps me notice features of my own environment. I'm using gross and fine motor skills to make representations that are satisfying to me. I'm collaborating with others. While I'm building structures, I consider things from different points of view, develop oral language skills, practice self-regulation, and engage my imagination. This is how I learn. And I'll read one more from the Drama Center. I am playing. I am using new vocabulary words to describe and connect to my own experiences in the world. I'm developing understanding of narrative structures, becoming aware of my audience, and becoming sensitive to the rhythms of language. My imagination is growing. I'm negotiating and collaborating with my classmates. This is how I learn. We have examples of these for others from Library and Research Studio, as well as Science and Engineering. Right, and this one they're talking about observation skills, taking risks, making recordings of what they notice, writing and drawing, playing with words, playing with lines and colors, communicating and understanding their ideas. Right, it's relating that play to their learning. So some quick things to think about when we talk about the elements of an intro to centers. So I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but an intro to centers is really that opportunity where the adult in the classroom, the teacher or the teacher's assistant, is introducing the materials and the space to the students. So unlike, an opportunity to say, okay, it's time for centers, off you go, right? On the flip side of that, we're saying, okay, we're going to be transitioning to centers. Today in the block center, this is what's available. This is what you might do with it, right? Today in the art center, you'll notice that I added the color blue to the paint easel, right? Explore with that, etc. Modeling the language and modeling the activity and your expectations for behavior in that space. It allows the adults to sort of highlight and launch the space, right? Really become the saleswoman or the salesman for that space. It's not uncommon for some centers or studios to lure in some children, but not all, right? But you might want, a certain child to explore at the discovery table if you've noticed that they haven't, right? So how are you going to sell that space to them? How are you going to make that really intriguing for them and to make them want to join it? In this sort of idea of introducing the space to students, adults remind the students that all centers are open, right? It's not like blocks are Monday, libraries Tuesday, discoveries Wednesday, right? On the flip side of that, it's all things all the time. Students are then able to really sort of plan better where they want to begin working and think about what they might do there, right? And that the adult can really model and sort of help talk them through that. And then the adult releases the students to the centers or the studios efficiently, right? So certainly it's not uncommon that classrooms will limit how many children can go to a space. And that's really smart. Blocks can be a really exciting place. However, you don't want everybody to be there because then it can get too crowded. There may not be enough materials to go around. So we really want to be thinking about limiting how many children can be in a space. So if you say 3 or 4 people are allowed to go to blocks, then you're going to want to, as the adult in the room, release students efficiently to that place and do so in a timely manner, because by the time you're done introducing and explaining what's available, children are going to be eager to get there. So just, we encourage folks to think about dismissing students from a whole group space into centers by the center, right? So who wants to go to blocks? Who wants to go to art? Who wants to go to the drama space today? As opposed to saying, Nicole, where would you like to go? Lauren, where would you like to go? Leanne, where would you, et cetera, and get through all the kids. So there's a lot to sort of break down when it comes to that, but really the point today being thinking about how the space is being introduced to the students, how behavior and material expectations are being introduced to students, and then how the students actually get to that area and whether or not they can freely flow within the time from one space to another, assuming that there's space to include them there. We mentioned the use of visuals and how that can really play into supporting the teacher in the classroom, right? So encouraging students to think about where they will work, right? Showing this as a label, whether it's on like a ring of cards or on some sort of visual that you have displayed to the children, right? It just encourages them to think about where they want to spend their time. And then also, once they've decided where they want to go, to be thinking about what they want to do there. Right? So the adult might point blank ask them, what will you do there? What's your plan? You want to go to the art center. Why? Right? Which tools do you want to use there? Right? What's available to them there? Is it paintbrushes today? Is it markers today? Is it both? Thinking about, getting children to sort of communicate and verbalize their goals in that space. And then asking them, who will you work with? Right? Who's already there? Or where is somebody that you want to work with? Who is that person and what do you want to do together, right? And just encouraging that peer cooperation and sort of interaction between the two students. So just another example of how visual aids can further support the playful learning in the space. We've talked about the role of the adult often this afternoon, right? Asking students those open-ended questions. So now this is the part of the day where students are are off into their space, right? They're engaged in the work and engaged with materials that they chose to be with. And now it's the role of the adult to go around and facilitate those conversations and see where the kids are at, right? See what they're thinking about, see what they're talking about, see what they're grappling with, and further those conversations. It's not an opportunity for teachers to go and make copies at the copy, right? It's really meant to be engaging between the adult and the student. Highlighting and embedding any literacy opportunities, right? Connecting their learning to a book you read, connecting their learning to an experience that they've had, modeling and facilitating how to interact with each other and how to use the materials, balancing adult talk and child talk, right? Really, that's sort of the point of those open-ended questions, right? Not asking things that the child can say yes or no to, but rather tell me more. What made you think of that? Have you experienced this before? Things like that. It's an opportunity for the adult to observe and document the student's actions, their conversations, right? And we'll chat about this in March, but really assessing where the child is at and thinking about that for future lessons and future instruction. It's an opportunity for adults to provide support when students ask for help. It allows them to grapple safely with problems on their own and with each other, and for the adult to step in when appropriate. And it highlights the important vocabulary words that you might be thinking about or you might be talking about in other lessons, and especially those that are connected with the content and the materials of that space. So another great idea oh, I'm going to hand this over to Anne. Sorry, Lan.
You were totally fine, Nicole.
I was.
Totally fine. Yeah, this is just following up on the role of the teacher and the kinds of questioning and conversations that as a teacher you want to have during this time. Always thinking about letting children take more of the lead. That's important. Sometimes it's really tempting for us to want to see if a child will do something, but stepping back and being willing to let them be the one to lead. And a way that we can do that more effectively is if we utilize some open-ended questions, or sometimes we refer to them as provocations. When you read through the examples on this slide, I hope that you notice how open-ended they are. It's really about offering an opportunity for a child to share with us what's most important to them. What did they want us to understand about their learning, what they're building, what they're doing at that time? And then using those questions to stretch their thinking. You might say to a child, I notice that you have used a lot of blues and greens in the painting that you have created today. I'm wondering what would happen if you used some red or yellow. What would you do with that? So we're not telling them what to do, but we are offering some additional thinking and maybe inspiring them to try something or to think more deeply or experiment. And that's really the point of the provocations. I know sometimes when teachers are first starting out with centers or studios and they're getting more confident in having those conversations, even just taking these questions and putting them on a little half sheet of paper on a clipboard and carrying them around with you can be somewhat helpful and supportive to you as an educator. I think sometimes teachers become really accustomed to doing all the talking in a classroom, and this really forces us to have to step back and be better observers and employ those open-ended questions a little bit more productively as we're watching what's unfolding in our classroom.
So some things that we want you all to try next. So similar to what we did with the video earlier, in that handout that Leanne provided via email, there's some links to lesson plans. So there's a lesson plan for pre-K, kindergarten, grade 1, and grade 2. These lessons are pulled from our For Me instructional program, which we have available on our DOE website. But we wanted to share just some examples to show folks what a playful learning lesson plan might look like, and allow you some time to sort of dig around in there and reflect on it. So we also want to incorporate a little bit of a break again too. So we'll have some time. I'll let you know when to be back in just a moment, but take some time to look at a lesson plan. You can look at all of them by all means, but certainly focus in on or hone in on one that's really specific and relatable for the grade of children that you teach, and be thinking about how those lesson plans are guides for thinking rather than scripts to follow, right? So how can that lesson plan, what would that look like in your classroom? So opposed to reading it like a script, how is it inspiring you, or how is it inspiring playful learning in a space for young children? So there's 4 points here to make, right? So we want you to think about, how does the lesson plan incorporate an interdisciplinary approach, right? How is it looking at all areas of growth and development for a child, not just math, and not just reading or literacy, not just science, right? How is it incorporating all of those disciplines in one lesson? Also be thinking about how those lessons or what are the guided play opportunities within that lesson, right? How do you envision that in a space with children playing, but then also the role of the adult at that time as well? Where are there opportunities for adult interaction? Those 2 bullets sort of hone themselves together. And then how does the classroom environment lend itself to playful learning? So what is it within the lesson plan that the environment comes into play, so to speak, right? Into the importance of that space. Is that what you threw in the chat, Leanne?
I did. I put all of the links into the chat.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you. So between that, I'm going to leave this slide up, but I did just want to also share too that we're going to incorporate a break. So it's 2:05. Do you want to come back around 2:15? What do you think, Leanne?
Yeah. Do you think 10 minutes is enough to look at lessons, and because we can say 2:20 and probably be okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't we say we'll be back together at 2:20, but during that time, not only take a break, but actually go in and look at those lesson plans. We'll leave these guiding questions up on the screen, and when we come back, we'll have some conversation, and then we'll go into our last 40 minutes of the time that we have together. We have one more activity that we'll be working through.
And I'm going to start to invite folks to come on back. Hopefully you had enough time to look through those lesson plans, at least one, if not more than one, and take a little bit of a stretch break for yourselves. I'm gonna go ahead and move into some collaborative reflection. So instead of coming off mute or chatting freely, we're gonna do what we call a chat waterfall. So I'm gonna post the first prompt, which was, how does the lesson plan that you reviewed incorporate an interdisciplinary approach to learning? So I'm gonna invite folks to type your response into the chat, but don't send it yet. Be thinking about the lesson plan you reviewed and your response to how it incorporated an interdisciplinary approach. Type your response in the chat, and then I'll count down, and we can all enter the chat, hit enter so that it shares with everybody at the same time, and that'll give us sort of this waterfall of responses. Even with a small group, it's still fun. I promise. Okay, so I'm going to count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and hit enter and let us know how your lesson plan incorporated an interdisciplinary approach. It would help if I Okay, so Jen, you noticed that each lesson required math, literacy, science, and a cultural connection and practices. Awesome. Some different aspects for that flooded into each other, the read alouds and the writing and the physical building. Nice. Okay, so lots of opportunities. I should have asked what lesson plan you reviewed too. So maybe on the next one you can identify which grade level you reviewed. So the second prompt was to think about how that lesson plan, what were the guided play components? So where did you see opportunity for playful learning? Go ahead and think about your response to the second prompt on guided play. Type that in, but don't enter it just yet. Okay, how about I'll count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and enter. Oh, Lisa, I know which grade you did based on your response. Many different ideas that could be built out. Animal homes, exploring with materials. Nice. Okay, the third prompt was around where are there opportunities for adult interaction? Think about your response to that. I'll invite you to wrap up your response and get ready to hit enter in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Opportunities for students to describe their challenges that they're having. Nice. I might have gone too fast on that one. Yeah. It was everywhere, Jennifer. Perfect. That's great. Oh, some modeling, Nicole, you noticed? Perfect. Nice. Yeah, these lesson plans, you probably noticed, do offer some sample script questions and provocations to ask to, but certainly educators wouldn't be tied to just that, right? Like we would want it to be specific to your classroom and to the time and space and students that are there. So the scripts that are in the lesson plans are merely examples of where to start. Lots of ways to expand on it though. Okay, the fourth prompt, how does the classroom environment lend itself to playful learning? So if you could imagine this lesson plan in the classroom space, how would the environment support it, right? What would you need? What would you envision as in terms of the materials that are listed, but also additional ways that your environment could lend itself to this? Start to wrap up your thinking. And we'll share in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Open but defined spaces. Saw some opportunity for those materials and how that would give them limitless possibilities for engagement. Well said, Lisa. Easily accessible materials, nice. age appropriate. Studio has its own space. Nice. Good. I'm glad you were all able to recognize that within the lesson plans and sort of identify where those pieces stand out as things to consider, right, when implementing these in the classroom, right, whether it's these particular lessons or ones from curricula that you're already utilizing in your space, right, sort of expanding on that and thinking about how it can further hone in on all of those pieces, the environment, the play, interdisciplinary learning, the role of the adult, all of the things, right? It's really strategic. It's really purposeful how we want this to look in the space. Okay, we're going to move on and we're going to sort of be thinking about everything we've discussed. We've got just over 30 minutes left together, and we want to give folks an opportunity to really think about this from their own sort of space. So what we're going to do, Leanne and I are going to take a moment to read a story to you. It's actually a poem. It's called Drum Dream Girl. And as we read this to you, relax and listen and take it in, but be thinking about what are some themes and content that you might pull from this text. So if you were reading this poem to your students and wanted to design centers or studios that pull lessons and pull vocabulary from the book, from the text itself, what might that look like? So it's a little bit of foreshadowing because we're going to do that afterwards. So for now, for the next few minutes, just sit back and relax and enjoy this poem. It is called Drum Dream Girl. It's how one girl's courage changed music. It's written by Margarita Engel. And the illustrations, which I think you would agree are really beautiful and incredibly colorful, are drawn by Rafael Lopez.
On an island of music in a city of drum beats, the drum dream girl dreamed. Of pounding tall Congo drums, tapping small bongo drums, and boom, boom, booming with long, loud sticks on big, round, silvery, moon-bright timbals.
But everyone on the island of music in the city of drum beats believed that only boys should play drums. So the drum dream girl had to keep dreaming, quiet, secret, drum beat dreams.
At outdoor cafes that looked like gardens, she heard drums played by men. But when she closed her eyes, she could also hear her own imaginary music.
When she walked under wind-wavy palm trees in a flower-bright park, she heard the whir of parrot wings, the clack of woodpecker beaks, the dancing tap of her own footsteps, and the comforting pat of her own heartbeat.
At carnivals, she listened to the rattling beat of towering dancers on stilts. And the dragon clang of costume drummers wearing huge masks.
At home, her fingertips rolled out their own dreamy drum rhythm on tables and chairs. And even though everyone kept reminding her that girls on the island of music had never played drums, the brave drum dream girl dared to play tall conga drums, small bongo drums, and big round silvery moon bright timbals.
Her hands seemed to fly as they rippled, rapped, and pounded all the rhythms of her drum dreams.
Her big sisters were so excited that they invited her to join their new all-girl dance band. But their father said only boys should play drums.
So the drum dream girl had to keep dreaming and drumming alone. Until finally, her father offered to find a music teacher who could decide if her drums deserved to be heard.
The Drum Dream Girl's teacher was amazed. The girl knew so much, but he taught her more and more and more, and she practiced and she practiced and she practiced until the teacher agreed that she was ready to play her small bongo drums outdoors at a starlit cafe that looked like a garden, where everyone who heard her dream bright music sang and danced and decided that girls should always be allowed to play drums, and both girls and boys should feel free to dream.
So we wanted to share with you a little bit from the historical note that's at the end of this particular book, because this poem was actually inspired by a true event. It was inspired by the childhood of a Chinese African Cuban girl who broke Cuba's traditional taboo against female drummers. In 1932, at the age of 10, Milo Castro Zaldariga performed with her older sisters as Anacana, Cuba's first all-girl dance band. And Milo went on to become a world-famous musician, playing alongside all the American jazz greats of the era. And at age 15, she played her bongo drums at the New York birthday celebration for US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, where she was enthusiastically cheered by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. There are now many female drummers in Cuba, thanks to Milo's courage. So this is the kind of book that it's lovely to be able to read it multiple times, really, and dive into it. But what we would like you to do over a period of about 10 minutes or so is chat with some colleagues. So we're going to split you into 2 breakout groups and invite you to probably first just share some of your takeaways around this book. What is this book? What could this book lend itself to in terms of students learning? And what might it inspire? What do you think kids would be interested in learning more about? What would they like to get engaged in around this book? And then we'd like you to do some brainstorming about what, if you were going to design some centers or studios for this particular book, what might those be? What would be some of your ideas? How would you set up and offer some resources similar to what you saw in the lesson plans that you just had some time to explore? So work collaboratively. What we thought we would do is split you up a little bit in terms of which centers. Nicole just popped into the chat box a link to a Google Doc so that you can actually type into it and have your ideas, and then you'll be able to walk away with some ideas for this particular book should you decide you want to use it in the future. So what we thought we would do is maybe have group 1 take the first 3 centers on that particular list, which I think are, let's see, when you open it, blocks, art and easel, and dramatic play. And then we'll have group 2 work on writing and drawing, library research, science, engineering, and discovery. So be thinking about what the text inspires, be thinking about keeping things open-ended. How can some of these ideas be interdisciplinary? And we'll do a bit of brainstorming in your groups, and then we'll come back together and take a look at what you came up with. Does that task make sense to everybody?
Like everybody's back. So we would love to hear, recognizing that we've got about 12 minutes left and a couple slides that Leanne and I still want to be able to share with folks. But we saw you typing away in there, so that's like such a great aspect of Google Google Docs. How was that for folks? How was that thinking through Drum Dream Girl and relating it to Playful Centers? What was that conversation like in your groups?
I thought our group did really well. I thought we had a lot of different ideas, so we tried to pull them together to see what category they could kind of fall under.
Mm-hmm.
And we also talked about how you could scaffold it pretty easily for various grade levels or age groups. Some of them tied into each other pretty easily, like a library research and discovery. We thought it could go in a lot of different directions.
Yeah. How about Lisa, Nicole? How was the conversation around? I think you guys were looking at like art blocks, dramatic play.
Yes. So what's nice is that, Lisa and I are in the same school, so we could actually
Yeah.
talk about it in regards to her students. So that was nice.
Perfect.
We talked about the blocks was actually a little bit like out of the three was a little bit harder because the first thing that comes to mind is like the drum design, but that's further down. So we were trying to think of like, well, what else can you build with blocks for this book? Could you so we talked about that, and then we both really liked the flower making idea. And like you could build it in lots of different ways. And then Lisa, do you want to talk about the empty staff idea?
Just that they, as part of the art piece, they may not actually know how to write music, but I love music and I'm very musical. So even giving them empty sheets of music and then having them figure out how would they make the music, and then they could pretend to, make a song and pretend to sing it or pretend to be a band and actually take it from there.
I love that connection, Lisa. I was wondering like, I am not musically inclined. I will be the first to tell you. I have the utmost respect for music and I love listening to it, but writing and reading it is not something that I'm particularly good at. So when I read that empty staff, I wasn't relating that to the staff sheet of music. Of course, it makes so much sense now that you've explained it. Yeah, really great way to incorporate that and introduce that to your students. Nice. Great.
Because they don't always, teaching kindergarten, a lot of times if you read a book that is actually a song, they'll have the music in the back. And it's always interesting to see which kids know, hey, that's music. You know what I mean? So if you give them that empty staff, this is what music looks like. What can you do with this kind of a thing?
Yeah. Great.
So inspirational.
So this template that you all used here is available to you. Of course, as the Google Doc, you should continue to have access to it. In the document that Leanne sent via email, there's a link to another one that you can just copy and keep for yourself, and it's blank. So certainly you're not tied to this template, but it is something just to give you a space to sort of be thinking about what centers and studios you might be able to incorporate in your space if you're not already, and then linking it to an activity that you've already got planned, right? Or a unit of study that your students are already engaged in. So that's there for you if you should choose to use it in the future. By all means, we would love for you to have access to that.
I think it's fun too when you can do it as a group and brainstorm together, because everybody brings a little bit of a different perspective to it and thinks of things that maybe somebody else wouldn't necessarily think of. So if you have the opportunity to work as part of a team of teachers, doing this kind of an activity can be really rewarding to generate your ideas all together and then take it out in your classrooms and see how it plays out, differentiate. It'll be amazing what teachers will discover and share across classrooms. So we hope that was helpful to you.
Yeah, even though it was fast paced, but hopefully get your brain flowing and thinking of playful activities related to a text. So these next few slides, I'm not going to spend much time on. It's actually a protocol called Thinking and Feedback. It's something that Leanne and I thought we might be able to incorporate into our third session in March. So we'll probably do that. Also, we can follow up via email after today's session and provide access to these as well so that you can think about it and look at it on your own. Ultimately, it's that reflection part of playful learning that we discussed or sort of shared at the beginning of the session. Encouraging students to think about their work, think about their challenges that they had during that playful experience, and bring it to a group for feedback. So we refer to it as thinking and feedback. We were going to model it for you, but we'll save those goods for next time, I think. But it does encourage a lot of student observation and student reflection, and it lends itself nicely to an assessment on behalf of the teacher as well. So that's where we sort of see that connection later on. But I just, so you know, that's why we're not spending much time on the slides today, given the time and lack thereof that we have. These were just some quick slides to show some inspirational pictures of students in Maine engaged in playful learning. These are students from a pre-K classroom. Accessing art and easel, discovery table, making boats and talking about things that sink and float, and then dramatic play during a unit on families and taking care of babies. Oops, sorry, I forgot there was that one last one too in dramatic play as well, taking care of babies. And then in kindergarten, we have some pictures in the block area. There's that worm picture again, which just is so fun. And then I think that one in the middle is inspired by the Three Little Pigs and the straw house, and the wooden house and the brick house, etc. And students engaging in some hypotheses and trial and error and building structures that withstand wind. In first and second grade, these are pictures of students in playful activities. This particular student made a spider out of these connects, and you had to be there, but it was really fascinating to watch the thought process and how they were going to use these sort of rigid materials to create a spider, which we don't typically think of as a rigid insect, right? And thinking about what aspects of a spider make it a spider, right? 8 legs, of course, is one obvious one. So it was really fascinating to observe that. These are some children writing. They were actually writing stories about bees. And these were students in an art studio that were creating bees and insects. And some students with some smaller blocks. Remind me, Leanne, what these ones are called. Not the unit blocks. I know.
Oh, Nicole, you shouldn't have asked me that.
I shouldn't have asked on the spot. But they're a form of
like flew right out of my head.
Yeah,
I'll see if I can find it real quickly while you're talking.
These students I shared in the picture earlier using materials on the floor on mats, and students in dramatic play with various different types of cloths and clothespins to secure them. Some writing and drawing. This little girl made a self-portrait complete with pink eyeglasses and rosy cheeks, which is just adorable. These children are in a farmer's market. This kiddo is making an environment with Legos and then some blocks built on from the text. The child's holding the book in that photo. Okay, take it away, Leanne. Do you want to do these prompts? You were looking for the name of those blocks, weren't you?
I was going into the materials list to see if I could find it there. But that's okay. I'll set people up for this. So just to bring a little bit of closure to our session today, we'd like you to use a really quick protocol. It's called I used to think, but now I know. And what we'd like you to do is just reflect a little bit on our time together this afternoon and get ready in the chat box to offer a reflection where you'll say, I used to think, and you'll say what that is. And then, but now I know, and fill that part in. So go ahead and take a couple minutes and set yours up. And like we did before, we'll do it as a bit of a waterfall. So I'll give you a minute or so to get yours ready, and then we'll count down and we'll let them go. And we can take a look at what people have to say. And it's Kapla blocks.
Kapla. Yes, thank you.
Kapla. 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 So I'm going to count backwards from 3, and then you can hit enter, and we'll see what people came up with. 3, 2, 1, go. Mhm. Mhm.
Nice, Carol. Yeah.
Some great ideas. Oh, I love Lisa. That I used to think play was important, but now I know it is. That's awesome. Yeah, and making more time for guided play, such an important part of the day. And something I think Nicole and I have noticed as we've worked with educators who've really embraced guided play in their classrooms is that they find that their students are so much more engaged in learning overall throughout the day because they know they're going to have this chance every day or 3 times a week to be able to self-direct their learning. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of them see better attendance in their classrooms. And the other thing that they'll often say is that they'll see remarkable changes in behavior of students, that kids who used to really struggle to remain in control of their bodies and staying focused will it's just like a 180-degree shift for them because they're being offered the chance to have more agency over their learning and explore some things that are really interesting to them. So we hope that this was inspirational for all of you, and we'd be excited to hear all about your how you might employ it in your classrooms. We would like to ask if you could take just a couple minutes. This is not a lengthy feedback form, but to offer us some feedback on the session. You can either use the QR code in front of you, or I did pop a link into the chat box just now that will allow you to go directly to it on your computer. And then following up on our session this afternoon, we'll send an email out to each of you with a certificate of contact hours for the session today. And we'll put that protocol for thinking and feedback in just in case it piqued your interest and you'd like to know more about it. The other thing that we'll offer in that email is a link to our For Me instructional programs. Some of you may be aware of those. Those are where the lesson plans you looked at earlier came from. But if that's helpful to you to take a look at those programs, you can certainly get to them through the link that we'll be sharing. We also just released yesterday in the Department of Ed's newsroom information about an overview session around those instructional programs and registration for summer training on them. So if you've take some time to explore them and think that this might be a good fit for you, please know that you can certainly reach out to us or attend that overview session to learn more about them. One of the nice things about the instructional programs is that they all incorporate centers and studios, and those are all ready designed lesson plans for you, so it just makes the lift a little easier. And thank you so very much for coming and joining us this afternoon.